Ashes and initiation. Lieutenant Elara Myles could still taste the ash in her mouth. The air on Sirian V was thick with smoke, the ground cratered and burning beneath her boots. The once bustling outpost was now a graveyard, twisted metal, mangled bodies, and shattered comm towers crackling with static. The Zarkith had come in fast, ruthless, their siege strategy precise and brutal. What was meant to be a surgical extraction had become a massacre. Elara crouched behind the remnants of a downed gunship, wiping blood from her visor. Her unit, Echo Squad, was reduced to 4 out of 12. Captain Halvers was dead, vaporized by plasma fire in the opening salvo. Command channels were silent. The Zarkith were jamming everything but emergency signals, and those were likely bait. "This is hell," muttered Reyes, her demolition specialist. His hands trembled as he primed the last of their thermal charges. "We walked right into it." Elara didn't answer. She was focused, eyes scanning the smoke-choked horizon. The enemy moved with mechanical precision, insectoid and cold. Their drones buzzed overhead, sifting the rubble for survivors. They weren't just cleaning up. They were hunting. "We move," she said finally. "Northwest quadrant. There's a relay station 2 clicks out. If we can hijack it, we can send a pulse burst and punch through the jamming." Nima, the squad's combat engineer, looked doubtful. "That's Zarkith-occupied territory. Might as well walk into a hive." "Better to move with purpose than die in place," Elara replied flatly. "They expect us to scatter. So we consolidate and strike. We're soldiers, not prey." They followed her without question. Maybe it was the calm in her voice, or the sheer absence of alternatives. Either way, she led them through fire and wreckage, ash falling like snow. The route to the relay was a labyrinth of debris and enemy patrols. Twice they had to freeze as Zarkith skirmishers passed close enough to hear their breathing. The alien soldiers moved like ghosts, their armor glinting with blue biolight, their weapons emitting a low, pulsing hum. When they reached the edge of the relay compound, Reyes and Nima flanked right to create a diversion. Elara and Corin, the team's last sharpshooter, crept around the back, slipping through a breach in the perimeter fencing. Inside, the station hummed with alien energy, organic-looking walls pulsing with embedded tech. She worked fast, jacking a human-made spike into a data port. Sparks flew. The console groaned. And then, connection. Her helmet HUD flared to life. Signal locked. Comms bridge initiated. She sent a compressed burst upstream, a location beacon and tactical report. Even if they died, someone would know what happened on Sirian V. Alarms blared. Zarkith forces descended like a thunderstorm. Corin went down in the initial rush, covering Elara's escape with suppressive fire. She didn't look back. Reyes triggered the charges as they fled into the canyon, flames roaring behind them, smoke hiding their retreat. They huddled in a collapsed bunker as the dust settled. Just 3 of them left. Reyes was bleeding out from shrapnel, Nima had a shattered leg. Elara sat silent, her rifle across her knees. Did it work?" Reyes rasped. Elara nodded. Pulse went through. "Evacs on the way." He gave a dry, blood-choked laugh. "Didn't think I'd die famous." "You're not dying," she said. "Not while I'm breathing." The evac came 12 hours later, a medevac gunship braving orbital fire to extract them. Elara carried Reyes across the landing zone, her armor blackened, her limbs screaming from fatigue. A medic reached for her, but she shook him off. "Start with him," she said. "He's worse." On board, a young lieutenant stared at her as if seeing a ghost. "You're the one from the relay," he whispered. "We heard the Zarkith started broadcasting warnings. Called you something weird." Elara said nothing. She was too tired, too numb. But she remembered the sound of the Zarkith comms, the words repeated like a ritual chant. Ashwalker. Death in smoke. A ghost made of fire. That night, before surgery, someone scribbled it on her armor, half in mockery, half in awe. Ghost Ash. She didn't know it then, but it would follow her for the rest of the war. The code name, Ghost Ash. They didn't ask. They just gave it to her. In the cold glow of a war room holotable, Elara Myles stood still, stiff in her new recon ops armor. Across from her, a trio of officers, 2 brass and 1 intelligence liaison, reviewed her file on a floating display. Syrian V. 3 survivors. A wiped comm relay. Viral interference. Psychological collapse of Zarkith infantry in an entire quadrant. Ghost Ash, said the liaison, a sharp-eyed woman in a slate-gray suit. That's what they're calling you. Not just Zarkith. Our own field units have started using it as shorthand. Elara didn't respond. The Admiral glanced at her. Do you understand what you've done, Lieutenant? I completed the mission, she replied, voice level. You created a myth, the Admiral said, leaning forward. And myths are valuable. Elara stiffened. I didn't set out to be a symbol. No one ever does, said the liaison. But symbols get people killed, or saved. We prefer the latter. A pause. Then the screen flicked over to her new assignment, Operation Black Echo. Elara frowned. Covert infiltration. Deep infiltration, corrected the liaison. Solo ops. Psychological disruption, stealth demolitions, data exfil, population control when necessary. Population control. That meant assassinations. Scaring alien leadership into submission. Making them think humans were everywhere. She stared at the image, a planetary schematic of Raxar Prime, a hostile weapons factory world. Target, an experimental fusion warhead under Zarkith control. How many people know I'm being deployed? She asked quietly. The liaison smiled. No one outside this room. Her insertion into Raxar Prime was quiet. No support, no backup. Just a disguised entry through a corrupted trade manifest, her identity masked with skin-thin reactive armor that mimicked the appearance of a Zarkith comms engineer. She practiced the walk. The body language. Zarkith weren't just physically alien, they felt different. They used scent markers for ranks, posture for tone, and hiss-click languages humans could barely replicate. She didn't need to blend forever. Just long enough. Inside the facility, the atmosphere was thick with sulfur. Machinery clanked in rhythmic pulses, and Zarkith workers moved like insects in a hive, heads low, arms twitching with mechanical extensions. The warhead was in the lower levels, guarded by a rotating patrol, shielded by alien encryption, and surrounded by command terminals built into the very walls. Elara crept like a wraith, her steps rehearsed, her breathing slowed to a cadence between machine cycles. When she reached the central control node, she didn't plant a bomb. She planted fear. Using a modified transceiver, she hijacked their internal PA system and laced it with whispers, human vocal patterns broken down and stretched across frequency bands Zarkith couldn't block. A death rattle in their native tongue. A name, Ashwalker. Then she shut off the lights. Panic spread faster than flame. The Zarkith feared chaos, and she gave it to them in doses. Disrupted navigation pulses. Internal mapping reversed. A single shadow, her silhouette, broadcast on every monitor in the station. Moving where no one could. By the time the final charge went off and the facility began to rupture from within, hundreds of Zarkith had abandoned their posts, fleeing into the wastelands. Some even attacked each other, thinking Elara had possessed them. She escaped in a garbage pod, drifting through debris and static until a stealth corvette picked her up 3 days later. On board, the recovery team didn't speak. They just stared. The warhead was gone. Vaporized. Mission report, no human casualties. Estimated enemy desertion rate, 73%. Back at headquarters, Elara sat in the debriefing room, armored fingers tapping the metal chair. The same liaison walked in, holding a datapad. No injuries? She asked. Just tired, Elara replied. You made them believe you were everywhere. I was. The liaison chuckled, scrolling through intercepted Zarkith transmissions. They've started calling you an unseen curse in their religion. Their priests are holding exorcisms. Elara rubbed the back of her neck. It's just tactics. Tech and timing. No, the liaison said softly. It's theater. And you're the lead. She set the datapad down. From now on, she said, you don't operate as Lieutenant Elara Myles. You are Ghost Ash. No rank. No face. Just a story. And stories are harder to kill. Elara looked down at her gloved hands. She remembered Reyes, burned but alive. Nima's half-laugh in the chaos. The silence of the evac ship. A name, she thought, can be armor. She stood. Where's the next mission? Behind enemy lines. They dropped her in the dark. No team. No support. Just the low growl of a stealth pod breaking atmosphere, slicing through the stormy skies of Drelak 4, a mining world twisted into a fortress by the Zarkith war machine. Below was a living labyrinth of tunnels, reactors, and breeding chambers. A place no human had ever escaped. Ghost Ash had orders to walk in anyway. She touched down with barely a sound, her armor absorbing the impact as she rolled into cover. The air was thick with iron and decay. Bioluminescent vines pulsed along the cavern walls, Zarkith biotech, always watching. Always listening. This wasn't just sabotage. Her mission was surgical chaos. Disrupt energy flow to the forward Zarkith fleet. Corrupt their supply chain. Plant-seeded viral protocols to sow confusion in their genetic memory net. And, if possible, extract data on Project Shardcore, an experiment in synthetic psionics that could change the war. Elara moved silently, each step calculated. She knew the patterns. Zarkith patrols were precise but inflexible. Their doctrine didn't allow for ghosts, only enemies who fought face to face. That rigidity made them powerful. It also made them blind to her kind of war. She infiltrated the outer facility during shift change. Zarkith drones passed inches from her helmet, scanning for movement, heat, scent. Her cloak module hummed, blending her thermals with the wall. She waited, breathing slow, until they moved on. One level down, she reached the main power core, a writhing mass of cables, tendrils, and radiant plasma. Alien technicians, tall, spindly, eyeless, worked in trance-like rhythm. She didn't attack. She simply walked among them, disguised by captured Zarkith pheromone tags and mimicry patches coded from her last mission. She reached the console, plugged in the spike, and the core started coughing itself to death. Power spiked. Systems reversed. A low-frequency shriek echoed through the compound, Zarkith alarm tones warped by human interference. Light flickered, and the trance broke. The alien engineers turned and screamed. She vanished before they fired. In the chaos, she descended deeper into the hive tunnels. Zarkith guards swept the upper levels in confusion. She let them chase shadows, doubling back, planting false signals and looped footage. She was everywhere. Nowhere. A myth moving on nerves and impulse. Then she found it. Shardcore. It wasn't a weapon. It was a child. Held in a stasis pod, its body halfway grown, skin translucent and pulsing. Human DNA mixed with something Zarkith, something cold and ancient. Neural wires pierced its skull. Around the pod were fragments of memories, stolen from captured soldiers, dreams, emotions, fragments of pain. They weren't building a psionic bomb. They were building a mind. Elara hesitated only once. Then she rigged the chamber with 3 charges. When she blew it, she didn't run. She broadcast one phrase into the Zarkith comms, translated roughly into their speech pattern. The ash walks among you. You harvest what you don't understand. It wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was message delivery. The escape was a blur. Smoke and blood. Exploding tunnels and panicked drones turning on each other in confusion. Elara slipped through it all like a ghost, every sensor she passed whispering nothing but static. She crawled into the evac pod just before the upper sector collapsed behind her. Back on the Vindicator, the debriefing officers asked the usual questions. How many did you kill? What was the damage estimate? Did you complete primary objectives? Elara just dropped the data core on the table and asked for coffee. But word spread. By the end of the week, intercepted Zarkith transmissions showed a disturbing trend, entire garrisons refusing to descend into tunnel complexes marked as haunted. Zarkith warriors requesting reassignment away from tainted sectors. Officers reporting signs of madness in units who had reviewed Ghost Ash footage. One line kept showing up in decrypted comm logs. Where she walks, thought fails. Shadows speak her name. Command called it psychological warfare. The troops called it something else. We don't send Ghost Ash to win battles. We send her when we want the enemy to doubt reality. And that, more than fear or force, was the sharpest blade humanity had ever created. Fear protocols. By the time the Zarkith convened their war council on Qatar Axis, humanity had already won that battle, without firing a single shot. They weren't just fighting soldiers anymore. They were fighting Ghost Ash. And she was no longer a person. She was a protocol. An idea. And fear, once seeded in a hive-mind culture like the Zarkithas, spread like a virus. Elara Myles sat in the observation bay of the stealth cruiser Mercy Black, watching as her next deployment route drew itself across the curved projection of a planetary model. Her face, once bright and full of human softness, was now sharp and unreadable. Not hard, just hollowed out. Focused. Deliberate. Captain Trellin, a decorated strategist from the Unified Earth Fleet, entered the room with a datapad and a furrowed brow. "This isn't just infiltration anymore," he said, handing her the file. She read silently. Zarkith leadership was fracturing. After her last mission on Drelak 4, entire nests had begun engaging in internal purges, convinced of infiltration from within. Psychic inhibitors were failing. Their mental network, once a flawless lattice of obedience, was now crawling with shadows that whispered her name in alien tongues. Ghost Ash. The walking wound. The white silence. Human intelligence didn't need to invent the legends. The Zarkith were doing it for them. "I don't understand," Trellin muttered. "You're one person. One operative. Why are they reacting like you're a plague?" Elara looked up from the report. "Because I am," she said flatly. Her next operation was simple in theory. Slip into Qatar Axis, bypass their mind scan grids, and deploy Fear Protocol Echo 1, a mimetic virus designed not to kill, but to erode the belief that the Zarkith were in control of their own minds. This wasn't sabotage. It was psychological demolition. With assistance from Earth's ThinkCraft division, Ghost Ash had been outfitted with a neuroaudio broadcaster. It would infiltrate the Zarkithas' low-band communication network, the part of their mind web responsible for impulse regulation and emotional dampening. She didn't need to fight. She just needed them to hear her voice. Elara entered Qatar Axis through a dead zone, an abandoned tunnel marked "Cursed" by the Zarkith. The air was thick with fungal mist. No lights. No guards. No resistance. They were afraid of a place they couldn't explain. Exactly where she thrived. She moved like smoke, hands gliding over cold biometal, her suit adapting to ambient heat and pressure. She reached the main comm core, a living tower of sensory nerves and pulsing tendrils, and attached the broadcaster to its primary nerve junction. Then she spoke. A single phrase, fed through layers of linguistic algorithms, warped through auditory shadows and filtered through 3 psychic tones. "I am already inside." Not a scream. A whisper. That was the protocol. Whispers were harder to fight. The effect was immediate. Across Qatar Axis, command chains broke. Entire platoons dropped their weapons and curled into fetal states, murmuring warnings to invisible entities. Others turned on their own, convinced their squadmates were human infiltrators wearing Zarkith flesh. By the time the virus was traced, it had already mutated, feeding off their own psychic feedback, rewriting command subroutines and eroding discipline. From orbit, Earth Command recorded chaos. But Elara didn't stay to see it. She was gone before the first fire started. Back aboard the Mercy Black, debriefing was brief. "You weaponized belief," Captain Trellin said, eyes wide with something between admiration and dread. "No," Elara replied. "They did. I just left the match." There was silence. Then a soft buzz from the comm unit. A new report filtered in. Zarkith High Command had issued a universal retreat order on 5 fringe sectors, believing they were contaminated by Ghost Ash presence. She hadn't even set foot in 3 of them. The protocol had evolved into a self-replicating legend. That night, Elara stood alone in the observation deck, staring into space. Her armor was off, her body bruised, her mind running calculations it had never been trained for. She hadn't been recruited for myth-making. She was just a soldier. A scout. A survivor. But war had changed. The battlefield had moved into the mind. And she had become its sharpest weapon. She closed her eyes and whispered the phrase again, not as a threat, but as a reminder. "I am already inside." Somewhere out there, a Zarkith would hear it. and break.